Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
African Union peacekeepers capture 3 sites in Mogadishu. Bahrain's opposition figures reject outcome of national dialogue. And Libyan revolutionaries seize strategic town of Ghazaya. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Libyan revolutionaries launched an attack on al-Gaddafi battalions stationed at the foot of the western mountains, specifically on the towns of Takut and Ghazaya, located near the Wazn crossing at the Tunisian border.
A spokesman for the revolutionaries said they entered the area after using missiles and tanks.
Early
on Thursday, preparations by the revolutionaries of the Nafusa Mountains were completed. They planned on launching an attack on al-Gaddafi's battalions, stationed at the foot of the western mountains, from Jaush in the east to al-Ghazaya in the west. The revolutionaries initiated a military operation to seize control of the mountain towns, described as strategic by virtue of being used by the battalions to shell Nalut and the Wazn crossing at the Tunisian border. Preliminary information indicates that the attack led the revolutionaries to completely capture the area of Jaush and reach the outskirts of the town of Badr that has a high population density. In addition, they are currently surrounding the area of Takut and al-Ghazaya after having entered the northern town of Khasra following NATO air raids, particularly on northern Takut. Images posted online show fierce battles in the eastern part of the country, especially in El Brega, and the revolutionaries' vigorous attempt to maintain the siege around al-Gaddafi's battalions in the city of El Brega. The battalions are surrounded from the sea, from the east, and from the desert. On the other hand, al-Gaddafi's battalions are surrounding groups of revolutionaries stationed at an oil field south of El Brega. Reports indicate the revolutionaries are being aided by others in the area of Wahab. Clashes between the two sides also took place in southern Misrata, where the revolutionaries launched an attack in the area of Grad al-Qatf, during which they seized vehicles and missiles. However, the attack also led to the killing and injury of fighters from both sides. Pictures were posted online showing what seems to be rare images of Hamas Muammar al-Gaddafi promising Misrata that they will enter the city again. The pictures were reportedly taken close to Misrata. His fighters are now regrouping with this aim. The mobilization of the revolutionaries in the Nafusa Mountains, including those in the city of Surman, highlighted once again that there is little hope of reaching a settlement to the current conflict in Libya, a settlement that has been much talked about in the past few weeks. This reality was confirmed by Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi himself when he challenged the revolutionaries, asking them to drop their weapons or face death. He also vowed to defeat NATO, regardless of the price it might cost. A number of night protests were organized in several neighborhoods of the Syrian capital Damascus and its countryside amid a raid campaign by security forces. 11 people, including 1 child, were killed in the city of Khanakar, south of Damascus, in what Syrian authorities say was an operation to capture armed terrorist groups. Protests also continued in other Syrian regions.
According to this video uploaded online, even children participated in the attempt to fend off security forces from storming their neighborhood of al-Muaddamiyya in the countryside of Damascus. Night protests continue in several neighborhoods of Damascus and its countryside despite the heavy deployment of security forces and the arrest and raid campaign that has targeted over 100 people. Kanaker is still witnessing the heavy deployment of security forces and those referred to as the Shabiha, despite the killing of 11 people and the arrest of nearly 250, according to human rights activists. On the other hand, the state-run media said security forces tracked down gunmen who tried to terrorize the residents of Kanaker and killed 4 of them. In Damascus, night protests took place on Khalid bin Walid Street. In addition, hundreds of young people took to the street in the neighborhoods of Al-Mazza, Sheikh Zayed, and Barza, despite the arrest of over 100 residents. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a women's night protest also took place in the Hajar al-Aswad neighborhood. In addition, local protests broke out in Rif Damascus, Katana, Al-Bukamal, Latakia, Hamma, Homs, Deir ez-Zor, and other regions. This daily scene repeats itself in various parts of Syria. Adding fuel to the protests is the Syrian security institution's arrests of prominent opposition figures, even though the state of emergency was lifted. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the latest arrests included that of Adnan Wehbi and Nizar al-Samadi, members of a National Coordination Committee for Democratic Change in Syria. In a surprising move, the new al-Qaeda leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, praised the protesters in Syria. At the same time, he said that Washington is currently attempting to replace Assad with a new regime.
America, which cooperated with Bashar al-Assad throughout his era, claims today that it stands with you. When it saw him floored by the earthquake caused by your fury, and after the catastrophe it endured in Tunisia and Egypt by losing 2 of its biggest stooges, Washington is now seeking to replace al-Assad, who loyally protected the border of the Zionist entity, with another regime.
The Syrian opposition announced online that Friday will be called the Friday of Your Silence is Killing Us, an attempt to get the silent majority of Syrians to join the protest movement on the Friday before the start of Ramadan. In London, a delegation of international lawyers who visited Hama and Damascus issued a report on the situation in Syria and the human rights conditions there. The delegation sent copies of the report to the Syrian Ministries of Justice and Social Affairs and a copy to the Syrian Lawyers Syndicate. Hayan Yaqub, BBC.
Arab and international news. Police and hospital officials said today 2 suicide bombers killed at least 15 people and wounded more than 30 in Iraq's Tikrit city as police and soldiers were collecting their salaries at a local bank. Police said 1 suicide bomber detonated his explosive among officers who were gathered outside the Rafaidan Bank in the center of Tikrit, north of Baghdad, and moments later another blew up a car when emergency workers arrived. Most of the casualties were Iraqi soldiers. Suicide bombers armed with guns killed at least 19 people and wounded another 35 when they attacked government buildings in Afghanistan's southern Uruzgan province today. The attack was the deadliest in the south in nearly 6 months and comes shortly after the killing of a string of powerful regional leaders, including a former governor of Uruzgan who was gunned down in his home in Kabul this month. Interior Ministry spokesman said that up to 6 suicide bombers stormed the provincial governor's compound and the police chief compound in Tirin, court capital of Uruzgan. He added that 3 bombers had detonated their explosive and police were engaged in a gun battle with the remaining attackers. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack.
Moving on to Bahrain, Bahrain's opposition figures have voiced disappointment with the results of the so-called national dialogue between the government and the opposition. The opposition says the reform proposal carries little weight as the country's largest opposition group, al-Wafaq, has pulled out. The reform proposal has also been criticized for failing to curb powers of state-appointed upper house and giving greater legislative and monitoring powers to the opposition. The opposition says they have also failed to reach an agreement on limiting the serving terms for ministers and head of government or a fixed quota for women representatives in parliament. Al-Wafaq pulled out of the national dialogue after facing an impasse over the dominance of the upper house, in which ministers are directly appointed by the king. The director of IGA, Ali Al-Ahmad, tells us why Bahrain's so-called national dialogue has failed and what could be expected in the future.
The dialogue itself was not constructed to reach any outcome, so that's why it was composed of the pro-government members, the overwhelming majority, who did not represent the people of Bahrain, and a small number of the opposition figures were allowed to be part of that. So it is a dialogue that has no use or value because it's not representing the people of Bahrain, and it's not between the relevant parties. The way the dialogue is constructed is invalid. It's not going to lead to anywhere.
Moving on to news from Egypt. Egypt says ex-President Hosni Mubarak's upcoming murder trial will take place in his capital, Cairo. Local media says a Justice Ministry official has confirmed that Hosni Mubarak, along with his two sons, will be tried in the capital's expo grounds. Mubarak and his sons are charged with ordering the shooting of anti-regime demonstrators during the revolution. The Justice Minister has said that Mubarak and his sons may be executed if found guilty. The trial is scheduled for August the 3rd. Mubarak, who was ousted by a popular revolution back in February, has been under arrest at a hospital in the Red Sea resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh. He is reportedly receiving treatment for a heart condition. His transfer to Cairo has been a key demand of people still protesting at the landmark Liberation Square. Meanwhile, in Tunisia, the country's former president and two of his relatives have been tried in absentia on fraud and corruption charges. Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali, his wife, and his son-in-law went on trial for seizing public land in the capital, Tunis. They are accused of unlawful acquiring of plots of land which were initially intended for public use. The indictment says they have bought the lands well below their real value and have sold them on at a much higher price. Prosecutors want Ben Ali and his relatives to receive maximum sentence for what they call loss of public property. Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia back in January following a popular revolution in his country. He's already been sentenced to over 50 years behind bars in two separate trials.
The African Union peacekeeping forces in Somalia announced they have seized control of 3 strategic bases in the capital Mogadishu, following a fierce attack on the position of the armed al-Shabaab fighters. The confrontations began today after the African forces launched an attack on the Bakara market, which is a key stronghold for al-Shabaab movement in central Mogadishu. Incoming news reports have confirmed that the African troops were able to infiltrate al-Shabaab's defensive lines in various areas. Dozens of people, including civilians, have been killed or wounded in the confrontations. Meanwhile, the UN World Food Programme and the WFP began to airlift emergency aid to help drought victims in Somalia. The first plane carrying 14 tons of food has arrived in Mogadishu. The WFP plans to supply 100 tons of food per month for 35,000 malnourished children in the country, where hunger is threatening 1/3 of the population.
شبح الجوع والجفاف بات يهدد الملايين من سكان القرن الأفريقي.
The nightmare of hunger and drought is threatening millions of people in the Horn of Africa. The residents are facing a sharp shortage of food and medical supplies. Dozens of people, especially children, die every day due to hunger and disease. The international community has not fully responded to the humanitarian crisis, despite rising death tolls. The FAO meeting in Rome also failed to bring about a solution to the crisis. In a modest move, the United Nations World Food Programme began to airlift emergency aid to drought victims in Somalia. The first plane carrying food supplies arrived in Mogadishu. WFP spokesman David Orr said that a plane carrying nutritional supplements has taken off from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, to treat malnourished children in Somalia.
We've got 14 tons on board this aircraft, which has just landed.
We have 14 tons of aid on board this aircraft. Our goal is to supply 100 tons a month to secure food for a total of 35,000 children.
وتشهد منطقة القرن الأفريقي بما فيها الصومال وأثيوبيا وجيبوتي وأوغندا.
Countries in the Horn of Africa region, including Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Uganda, are witnessing the worst wave of drought in decades, as cited by the UN. The UN has estimated that 12 million people, including 4 million Somalis, are facing a crisis in the region. At the international level, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has telephoned a number of Persian Gulf leaders to urge them to help finance the campaign aimed at combating starvation in Africa. None of the African nations have offered donations to help the drought victims in the Horn of Africa outside of those affected by it.
واكتفى الغرب على رأس أمريكا التي تعد جزءا من سبب أزمة المجاعة.
The West, most notably the U.S., which is partly responsible for the hunger crisis, has promised to offer modest aid, despite its military activities in the Horn of Africa, especially Somalia. The high cost of drones often used by the U.S. Army in the region is sufficient enough to provide food and clothes to countless numbers of refugees there.
The nationwide storm of social unrest continues to gain momentum as Histadrut Chief Ofer Aini threw his weight behind the housing protests. Temporary encampments have sprung up in 25 cities across the country. IBA's Ariel Reshef is standing by in our Tel Aviv studio to bring us the latest. Ariel, there seems to be growing pressure now on the Prime Minister to step up his efforts with regard to the housing crisis.
Well, Laura, the social maelstrom here in Israel is certainly squeezing Prime Minister Netanyahu from all sides, despite the fact that he announced a series of housing reforms just 2 days ago. As I passed by the ever-expanding tent city on Rothschild Boulevard, it was clear that these protesters were not placated by Netanyahu's proposal. After issuing a stern warning to Netanyahu yesterday, Histadrut Labor Federation Chairman Ofer Aini announced that the country's labor unions will join the housing protests if the issue is not resolved by next week. He urged all sides to enter serious negotiations to end the current turmoil. For his part, today Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz welcomed talks with Aini over the housing debacle. But to add insult to injury, the Knesset Research and Information Center released a 30-page report today in which it declared that the government has lost its long-term vision on everything connected to the housing and construction policies. The document was commissioned by 6 members of Knesset from across the political spectrum, including some coalition members from Likud, Labor, and Yisrael Beitenu. The Knesset report and Ofer Aini's declarations come as thousands continue to decry the shortage of affordable housing across the country. Today, several activists gathered outside the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange to protest skyrocketing prices. Some 300 people marched last night from the original tent encampment on Rothschild to Levinsky Park in South Tel Aviv. Participants shouted anti-Netanyahu slogans and demanded concrete solutions. And now at the same time, over 100 student activists marched toward the private home owned by Prime Minister Netanyahu on Gaza Street in Jerusalem, claiming that because the residence has been abandoned, it should be sold. Now, of course, all of this is an attempt to prove that Netanyahu is out of touch with Israelis struggling to cope with the soaring cost of real estate. Laura, several Arab communities in the north are also slated to join the campaign in the coming days. And organizers of the nationwide effort are planning to hold mass rallies in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, and Nazareth on Saturday night. Laura?
Ariel, you've also been following the crisis in the healthcare system. Ofer Aini has endorsed the doctors' actions as well, hasn't he?
That's right, Laura. Aini says that the unions will also join the doctors in their ongoing quest for better work conditions. But it's not only the Histadrut that's pledged their support. Now, opposition leader Tzipi Livni has also stepped in to show her solidarity with medical professionals. Today, she marched alongside Israel Medical Association Chairman Leonid Edelman and 4 other officials on their trek from Ramat Gan to Jerusalem. Edelman, who is now in his 4th day of a hunger strike, by the way, confirmed that talks have dead-ended with the Treasury and appealed to the government to rescue the healthcare system. Now, President Shimon Peres called Edelman to urge him to take care of himself, saying, "You carry the weight of the improvement of our healthcare system on your shoulders. You are valuable to us. Mind your health." Dozens of doctors from the Rabin and Sharon medical centers paraded through the streets of Petach Tikva today, protesting deadlock negotiations. Patients at Kfar Saba's Meir Hospital joined their physicians in demonstrations as well.
In a development at the Iraqi border, Iran renewed its artillery shelling of a number of border villages in the Shuman Governorate in Iraq's Kurdistan region. The National Union of Kurdistan's website quoted the director of Qasr District Affairs, saying that Iranian artilleries shelled a number of villages in the Shuman Governorate last night, and indicated that a large number of families, residents, and shepherds in the region were displaced. Meanwhile, eyewitnesses said that armed confrontations erupted and are still ongoing between the Iranian forces and members of the Party of Free Life of Kurdistan, PJAK, near the Iraq-Iran border. The Prime Minister's advisor on Kurdish affairs, Adel Barwari, denied that Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki approved that Iran carry out military operations to capture gunmen inside Iraqi territories. Barwari stated that Iran wants to create an excuse to shell the Kurdistan border villages, affirming that Iraq will not approve of executing military operations to capture PJAK members inside Iraqi territories.
Iran's repeated shelling of the Iraqi border villages was the first issue brought forward in a meeting between the Iraqi commanders of the border forces and their Iranian counterparts.
The commander of the Iranian border guards asserted that military operations are ongoing within the Iranian border, accusing PJAK members of being responsible for shelling Iraqi regions.
The commanders of the border forces are convening a series of international meetings with Iraq's neighboring countries. The most recent meeting with Iran was not the first of its kind. Issues of mutual interest were discussed in order to analyze and solve the problem, if found. Iran's shelling of Iraqi border villages was the focus of discussion at the meeting. The Iraqi side brought to light the extent of the shelling's negative effects on Iraqi families. The shelling led to major damages of people's lives and properties and displaced families living near the border.
We made it clear that this shelling has inflicted losses on the Iraqi people, caused damages to their lives and properties, and led to the displacement of a number of Iraqi families who live near the border. The result of this does not benefit anyone.
The commander of the Iranian border guards, Brigadier General Hossein Tofilghari, asserted that in the latest operation, the Iranian forces are attempting to recover some highlands that were occupied by PJAK inside the Iranian border. He said that the heavy weaponry shelling of Iraqi territories is being carried out by PJAK based on the information that PJAK possesses these weapons.
We do not have any information about the shelling on the Iraqi side. Our goal is to recover the mountainous highlands from PJAK within our border. Our forces did not advance a single meter into the Iraqi territories. PJAK possesses weapons, so it's possible that it is shelling the Iraqi regions.
Despite both the denials and assertions made by Iran and Iraq, a final report will be issued by the fact-finding committee formed by the Parliamentary Security and Defense Committee. The report will set the criteria for taking political decisions and for calling on our neighbor Iran to put an end to its military operations in the Iraqi border villages. From Baghdad, Zaid al-Mustaf, Al-Iraqiya.
وعلى وقع الانفصال بين الشمال والجنوب تأثير العملة في السودان.
The separation of North and South Sudan is affecting the currency in Sudan. Contrary to what the Southerners agreed to, South Sudan launched its own new currency. The Khartoum government responded by changing its currency as well to avoid an array of problems and complications such as the massive amount of old currency circulating outside the North, especially since it contains symbols that represent the South and its culture. Our correspondent Sami Shinawi reports from Khartoum.
من الخرطوم مراسلنا سامي الشناوي.
Sudan and South Sudan are transferring the platform of their conflict to a currency Cold War after South Sudan launched its new currency, contrary to what it had previously agreed to. Sudan is downplaying the political and economic implications of this move. It does not see the $750 million worth of Sudanese pounds, which was left from before the secession and agreed to be circulated in South Sudan for another 6 months, as an economic threat, and it hopes for trading cooperation with the South for the interests of the two countries' people.
This opens a real door for the trading business between the two countries in the coming days. This truly benefits both countries. Trading in a more satisfying way will follow, which will enable the flow of goods and services between the two countries.
Launching the new version of the currency in the north costs $60 to $80 million. It may put Sudan's economy, which is faltering due to the outflow of oil revenues, into a chaotic state. However, political observers are more concerned about its impact on the future relationship between the north and the south.
The government of the south surprised the Sudanese government by announcing it had printed its own currency, ready to be launched as of July 18th. The Sudanese government therefore decided to make the same move and announced the launch of its new currency as well. This matter, in essence, is an obvious currency war, which leads to negative effects on the economies of both the north and the south.
In 11 years, the currency has been changed 3 times. The last currency change was in 2007, when it was changed from the dinar to the pound, according to the Nafasha Agreement, which at the time fully rejected the Arab Islamic character. From pound to dinar, then dinar to pound, then who knows? The fluctuations of currency take place in accordance with the fluctuation of the political process, and the biggest loss is inflicted on an economy that swings between modest rises and falls that may not be able to recover.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.